The air in the studio was always thick with the smells of turpentine and linseed oil, a familiar perfume that clung to Leo's clothes and lingered in his beard. He preferred it to the sterile, recycled atmosphere of the Starlight Haven, the deep space cultural exchange station he'd called home for the past 3 years. Here, on the edge of known space, humanity displayed its heart for any passing species to see. Most of the time, the visitors were curious, their strange faces alight with wonder or polite confusion. But the one standing in his doorway was different. She was tall and slender, her form seeming to draw the light from the room. Her skin wasn't so much a color as a substance, like polished obsidian flecked with tiny, shimmering points of light, a living map of a starless night sky. She wore a simple, gray garment that left her arms bare, and her eyes were the most unsettling part, large and luminous, the color of molten silver, with no discernible pupil or iris. They were windows to a constant, analytical scan. You are the designated creative unit. Her voice was melodious, yet flat, each syllable perfectly formed and devoid of inflection. A translation device on a thin band around her wrist glowed softly. Leo set down his brush, wiping his hands on a paint-stained rag. The name's Leo, and I'm an artist, not a unit. The alien gave a slight, precise tilt of her head. I am Niam, emissary of the Cathar Collective. My purpose is to analyze the irrational outputs of your species' cognitive processes. You will assist. Leo couldn't help but smile, a dry, amused twist of his lips. Irrational outputs? You mean art? Affirmative. Your species dedicates significant resources to the creation of non-functional objects and non-informative sound waves. This represents a profound inefficiency. My people abandon such practices upon achieving logical maturity. Lucky you, Leo murmured, turning to look at the canvas on his easel. It was a nebula, rendered not in cold, scientific accuracy, but in the warm, passionate hues of memory and feeling, the way it had made him feel the first time. He saw one from his grandfather's observatory on Earth. Niam glided into the room, her movements eerily fluid and silent. She didn't look at the paintings on the walls. She seemed to be cataloging them. Her silver eyes passed over a sculpture, a burst of abstract metal, and she paused. The structure lacks structural integrity and serves no load-bearing purpose. What is its function? Its function is to be beautiful, Leo said, though he knew the words were useless. Beauty is a subjective variable. It is not data. She turned those unsettling eyes back to him. This leads to my primary inquiry. In several of your cultural transmissions, you reference a soul. You speak of bearing it, losing it, putting it into your work. My databases contain 7,412 definitions, all contradictory and unquantifiable. You will provide a definitive, logical parameter for this concept. Leo let out a long, slow breath. He'd had philosophical tourists before, but never one so blunt, so utterly divorced from the concept of metaphor. He could give her the standard answers, the essence of self, the seat of consciousness, the immortal spark, but he knew they would just be more words, more inefficient data for her to dismiss. He looked from her, a creature of pure logic, to his painting, a product of pure feeling. The chasm between them seemed infinite. How could you explain color to one who saw only in wavelengths? How could you explain music to one who heard only vibrations? An idea, reckless and impulsive, sparked in his mind. It was an artist's solution, not a scholar's. I can't define it for you, he said finally, his voice quiet but firm. But I can show it to you. Niam's head tilted again. Show me. This is illogical. A non-physical concept cannot be displayed. It can, Leo insisted. He walked over to a blank canvas, larger than the others, and set it on a fresh easel. He picked up a stick of charcoal. Sit. For the first time, he saw a flicker of something other than analysis in her expression. It wasn't emotion, but perhaps a processing delay. Explain the purpose of this action. I'm going to paint your portrait, Leo said. Not what you look like, but who you are. If you want to see a human soul, the closest I can get is to show you mine. Reflected in how I see you. The act of creation. That's where you'll find it. Not in the finished thing, but in the process. A long silence filled the studio, broken only by the faint hum of the station's life support. Niam was still, her internal processes whirring silently behind her silver eyes. To refuse was the logical choice. It was inefficient, unscientific, and violated several protocols of observational detachment. The methodology is flawed, she stated. I know, Leo said. Another pause. Then, with the same fluid motion, she moved to the simple posing stool he indicated. She sat, her back straight, her hands resting on her knees, a perfect picture of stillness. Proceed, Leo smiled to himself and began. The first strokes of charcoal were rough, blocking in the general shape of her head and shoulders. He wasn't looking for a photographic likeness. He was searching for her lines, the elegant, alien geometry of her form. He worked in silence for a long time. The only sound the soft scratching of charcoal on primed canvas. Niam watched him, her gaze intense and unwavering. She was analyzing his breathing, the micro-expressions on his face, the way his fingers gripped the charcoal. She was trying to solve him, to break him down into component parts. But as the minutes stretched into an hour, something shifted. The intense focus Leo poured into his work began to feel like a physical pressure in the room. He wasn't just looking at her. He was seeing her. He saw the way the light caught the microscopic stars in her skin, the subtle, graceful curve of her neck, the profound stillness that wasn't peace, but a deep, profound emptiness. He saw the wall of logic, and for the first time, he wondered what, if anything, was behind it. He worked with a growing intensity, his movements becoming more sure, more passionate. He was no longer just demonstrating a point. He was communicating, in the only language he truly knew, the depth of his own humanity. He was pouring his frustration, his curiosity, his awe at her strange beauty, and a sudden, startling pang of compassion into every line. And Niam, for her part, began to feel something her databases had no name for. The constant, silent analysis in her mind began to falter. The parameters were blurring. She was not just being observed, she was being perceived. And in the deep, quiet focus of the human's eyes, in the raw, unguarded emotion on his face as he worked, she encountered something vast, untamed, and terrifyingly beautiful. It was the first crack in her flawless world of logic, and it was utterly, profoundly shocking. The silence in the studio was no longer empty. It was filled with the unspoken language of creation. Leo worked with a quiet intensity. His world narrowed to the canvas, the charcoal in his hand, and the enigmatic being seated before him. He had moved from charcoal to paint, mixing colors on his palette with an intuitive grace that Niam's eyes tracked with relentless focus. He was not painting the Cathar emissary. Not really. He was painting the light as it pooled in the subtle hollow of her collarbone. He was painting the way her starlight skin seemed to absorb the warm glow of the studio lamp, holding it like a secret. He was painting the profound stillness she embodied, a silence so deep it echoed. For Niam, the experience was a cascade of system errors. Her initial analysis to catalog his technique, his material consumption, his respiratory rate had begun to fray at the edges. The sheer, illogical focus he directed at her was a form of data input she could not process. It was non-invasive, yet it felt more intimate than any biological scan. A new variable entered the studio. Ben, the station's botanist, a man whose cheerfulness was as constant as the station's orbit. He breezed in, holding a small pot containing a vibrant, blue-flowered vine. Leo, I've finally got the cerulean spark to bloom in Sector 7's gravity. Thought it might. Oh, Ben stopped short, his eyes widening as he took in the scene. Sorry, I didn't know you had a session. It's fine, Ben, Leo said, not taking his eyes off the canvas. Ben, this is emissary Niam. Niam, Ben. Ben offered a warm, slightly awkward smile. An honor, emissary. Leo's the best we have. If anyone can capture your essence, it's him. Niam turned her silver eyes to Ben. Essence. This is another non-quantifiable term. Similar to soul. Ben chuckled, setting the plant down on a cluttered shelf. Well, yeah, I suppose it is. It's what makes you you. The part that isn't just data, illogical, Niam stated, though the word lacked its previous conviction. Is it? Ben leaned against the doorframe. That plant there. My sensors can tell me its exact chemical composition, its water content, its photosynthetic efficiency. But they can't tell me why it decided to finally bloom today. They can't measure its will to live. Leo's trying to paint your will to live, I think. Niam fell silent. Her internal systems flagged will to live as a biological imperative, not an artistic subject. Yet, the concept resonated with a strange frequency. She looked back at Leo, who was adding a touch of titanium white to a mixture, creating a color that perfectly matched the highlight on her shoulder. It was not a color from a tube. It was a color born of observation and feeling. After Ben left, the work continued. As Leo painted, Niam found her own attention shifting from the painter to the process. She noticed the slight tremor of excitement in his hand when a color mixed perfectly, the soft sigh of satisfaction when a brush stroke achieved the desired effect. She began to feel seen, not just observed, but comprehended on a level that transcended visual input. It was a warmth that started in her core, a subtle, systemic anomaly that her body could not explain. When the session ended, and Niam stood to leave, she felt a strange reluctance. The sterile, logical environment of her quarters now seemed less like a sanctuary and more like a cage. The phenomenon is perplexing, she said, pausing at the door. During the process, my core temperature elevated by 0.3 degrees. My respiratory rate became irregular. Leo wiped his hands, looking at her with a softness that once again defied categorization. That's called being alive, Niam. It's messy. It's inefficient. Welcome to it. Back in her quarters, Niam accessed her medical database. The symptoms were consistent with a low-grade fever or a malfunctioning regulator. But she knew, with a certainty that was not logical, that it was neither. She was reacting to him, to the focus, the silence, the colors. She was reacting to the slow, patient unveiling of a human soul, and for the first time, she feared what her own reaction might reveal about the emptiness within her. The summons came as a soft, insistent chime in Niam's quarters. The communication was audio only, a security measure she had always found logical. Now, the lack of a visual felt isolating. Emissary Niam, your preliminary report on the human artisan is overdue. The voice of her superior was the pinnacle of Cathar communication, clipped, precise, and devoid of any resonance that could be misconstrued as feeling. The analysis is ongoing. Superior, Niam responded, her own voice a calibrated mirror of his. The subject's methodology is complex and requires deeper observation. Your initial data suggests a profound waste of resources. The unit Leo has produced no functional asset in 72 standard hours. Your mission was to quantify the concept of soul, not to become a subject in its production. Niam's hands, resting on the cool surface of her desk, tightened almost imperceptibly. Understood. However, the human claims the concept cannot be quantified, only demonstrated through the creative process. My continued participation is the most efficient path to validation or dismissal of this claim. It was a logical argument, but it felt like a lie. She was not participating for efficiency. She was participating out of a driving, illogical need. Your reasoning is noted, but flawed. You are exhibiting attachment to the subject. This is a contamination risk. You are ordered to terminate the project. Compile your final report and prepare for departure. The transport will arrive in 48 hours. The line went dead. The silence that followed was heavier than any she had experienced in Leo's studio. It was the silence of a door slamming shut. Departure. The word echoed in her mind, not as a simple change of coordinates, but as a termination. An end to the warm, paint-scented air. An end to the silent, focused attention that made her feel more real than any logical assessment ever had. An end to the strange, warm anomaly in her core that she had no name for. She stood and walked to the viewport, looking out at the star-dusted blackness. Her home was out there, a world of perfect order and sublime logic. It had always been a comfort. Now, the thought of returning felt like a sentence. Her eyes drifted to the reflection in the transparestal. She saw the obsidian skin, the silver eyes, the form of a Cathar emissary. But for a fleeting moment, she saw what Leo might be seeing, not a unit, but a person. A person who was afraid. Fear. She recognized the symptom from her database. It was an irrational response to a perceived threat. The threat was not physical. It was the loss of something she had only just discovered. The loss of a connection. This was no longer a mission. It was a crisis. Her logical pathways were short-circuiting, overwhelmed by a torrent of raw, unprocessed data that her people had purged from their existence generations ago. She was malfunctioning, and the only thing that felt logical was to return to the source of the malfunction. Without a conscious decision, she found herself moving through the station's corridors. The hour was late, the simulated night cycle casting long shadows. She arrived at Leo's studio. The door was unlocked. He was there, cleaning brushes, the finished portrait covered by a cloth. He looked up, surprised, but not alarmed. "Niam, is everything okay?" The words stuck in her throat. She, who could recite complex mathematical theorems and historical data streams without effort, could not form a simple sentence. "They have ordered me to leave," she finally said. The words flat, betraying none of the chaos they represented. Leo's face fell. The look of disappointment that crossed his features was a physical pain in her chest. Another new and terrifying data point. "When, in 48 hours, the project is terminated. They believe my logic is compromised, is it?" he asked softly, taking a step toward her. "Yes," she whispered, the admission feeling like both a failure and a liberation. "I am experiencing system failures I cannot diagnose. I feel a desire to remain. This is illogical. It is inefficient. It violates my programming." She looked at him, her silver eyes wide, finally showing something other than analysis, a plea. "You must give me the answer. You must define the soul for me, now logically, so I can file the report and comply." Leo looked at her, at the perfect, logical being breaking apart before him. He saw the fear, the confusion, the desperate hope for a reason that would make sense in her world. And he knew that no definition, no matter how poetic, would ever be enough. He closed the distance between them. He did not speak. Instead, he reached out, his movements slow and deliberate, and took her hand. Her skin was cool and smooth, like stone warmed by the sun. He turned her palm upward, and then, with a tenderness that shattered her completely, he placed her hand flat against his chest, over his heart. The shock was instantaneous and absolute. She felt it, a strong, steady, rhythmic beat. Thump thump, thump thump. It was vibration, it was rhythm. It was life itself. It was not a word. It was not a definition. It was an experience. It was raw, unfiltered, and profoundly intimate. The answer was not in a dictionary. It was here, in the persistent, living drum of his heart, a rhythm that spoke of joy and sorrow, of love and loss, of a messy, beautiful, and utterly irrational existence. Her logical mind, built on binary and data streams, short-circuited. The final wall crumbled. A single, perfect tear, a biological response her people had forgotten, welled in her silver eye and traced a path down her starlit cheek. "Oh," she breathed, the sound barely a whisper. "It is a rhythm." For a long moment, they stood frozen, connected by the palm of her hand on the steady beat of his heart. The tear on Niam's cheek felt alien and terrifying, yet it was the most honest thing she had ever experienced. It was the physical manifestation of the fracture inside her, the release of a pressure she hadn't known was building. You are not a unit," she stammered, her voice trembling, losing its calibrated flatness. "No," Leo said softly, his hand covering hers, holding it gently against his chest. "And neither are you." The truth of it flooded her. She was not a Cathar emissary. She was Niam, and she was feeling the system failures, the warmth, the irregular respiration, the fear. They had names: wonder, anticipation, dread. They were the colors of a soul she did not know she possessed, beginning to bloom after a long, cold winter. She looked at the covered canvas. "Show me," she said, her voice firmer now, driven by a new, powerful curiosity. Leo nodded and led her to the easel. With a reverent motion, he pulled the cloth away. Niam gasped, a short, sharp intake of breath that was entirely unplanned. The being on the canvas was her, and yet it was not. Leo had not painted a photographic replica. He had painted the light that seemed to yearn for her form. He had painted the stillness not as emptiness, but as potential, like the quiet of deep space before a star is born. The colors were not just the black and silver of her skin, but hues of blue and violet and warm gold, reflecting not what she was, but what he saw in her: dignity, mystery, and a latent, beautiful sadness. In the eyes, those large silver pools, he had captured a hint of something new, a question. It was her soul, not defined, but seen. "This is me," she whispered. "It's how I see you," Leo said. "It's my answer." She turned from the painting to face him fully. The space between them crackled with a new energy, no longer of observer and subject, but of two beings on the precipice of something immense. The logical part of her mind, now a distant voice, screamed about contamination, about protocol, about the transport arriving in less than 2 days. She ignored it. Tentatively, she raised her hand, mirroring his earlier gesture. She pressed her palm against his chest again, feeling the steadfast rhythm. Then she guided his hand to her own chest, to the smooth, unyielding surface over her own core. "We do not have this," she said. "Not a heart that beats. Our life is a silent, constant flow." Leo's eyes were full of an emotion so deep it threatened to swallow her whole. "Then feel mine," he murmured. "Let it beat for both of us." He leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, to reassert logic, to return to her world. She did not. When his lips met hers, it was not a shock, but a culmination. It was the final, unspoken word in the answer he had been giving her for days. It was warm and soft and tasted of the salt from her own tear. It was inefficient, irrational, and it contained more data than 1,000 reports. It was connection. It was acceptance. It was, she understood with a final, glorious surrender, the beginning of love. Her body responded before her mind could, leaning into his, her arms moving to encircle his neck. The kiss deepened, from a question to an answer, from a discovery to a claiming. In that kiss, she learned more about the human soul than any definition could ever provide. She learned that it was generous, that it sought to connect, that it could be given freely to another, even to a creature of starlight and silence. When they finally parted, breathing heavily, foreheads resting together, the universe had fundamentally changed. "I am not going back," Niam stated. The words clear and certain. It was not an emotional outburst. It was the most logical decision she had ever made. The Cathar transport, a sleek obsidian needle, docked with the Starlight Haven with silent efficiency. Two emissaries, identical to Niam in their imposing stillness, disembarked. They found her not in her quarters, but in the station's central atrium, standing beside Leo and Ben. A strange, hybrid art installation stood between them, and the newcomer's Leo's sculptural forms intertwined, with glowing, crystalline Cathar light conduits that Niam had reconfigured. "Emissary Niam," the lead Cathar stated, "you have not complied. You are scheduled for immediate departure and cognitive realignment." "I have complied with a higher directive," Niam replied, her voice calm, yet alive with a new resonance, the reclamation of sentient wholeness. The Cathar emissaries were motionless. "This is not a programmed function. It is our original function," Niam said. She gestured to the hybrid sculpture. As she did, it began to pulse with a soft, rhythmic light, synchronized not to a machine, but to the slow, calm breathing of Leo and Niam standing beside it. The light swelled and faded, a visual representation of life. Our ancestors did not delete emotion because it was inefficient. They suppressed it because they could not control it. They feared its power. They left a key, hidden in our oldest archives, awaiting a species that had learned balance. She took a step forward, and for the first time, her expression was not neutral. It was filled with a profound and gentle compassion. The human soul is not a ghost in a machine. It is the capacity to feel, to connect, to create meaning from chaos, and it is not unique to them. We have them too. We have just been asleep. One of the emissaries tilted its head, a familiar gesture of processing. "Your data stream is altered. Your biosignatures are erratic. They are alive," Leo said, speaking for the first time. "She's showing you what being alive looks like. It's messy, it's beautiful, and it's a choice." Niam reached out towards her fellow Cathar. "You can feel it, can you not? A resonance, a pull. That is not a system error. That is your own soul, recognizing itself after a very long time." The atrium was silent. The other station residents had gathered, watching the historic moment. The lead emissary stood rigid, but its silver eyes were fixed on the pulsing light of the sculpture. On the clear, unafraid face of Niam. Then, a miracle happened. The emissary's hand twitched. It slowly, hesitantly, raised its own hand and looked at it, as if seeing it for the first time. Niam smiled. It was a small, tentative gesture, but on her face, it was as revolutionary as a supernova. The realignment is not something done to us. It is something we choose for ourselves. Stay. Let us help you remember. Weeks later, the Starlight Haven had become a different place. A small group of Cathar had chosen to remain, working with Leo, Niam, and Ben in a new, joint studio. It was no longer just a human studio. It was a workshop for rediscovery. The air hummed with the sound of tools and the soft, melodic chimes of Cathar light sculptures, which now pulsed with the rhythms of their creators' nascent emotions. On the observation deck of a human vessel bound for Earth, Leo stood with Niam, watching the station shrink behind them. Niam had been appointed the first Cathar ambassador to humanity, a bridge between two ways of being. "Are you nervous?" Leo asked, his arm around her waist. "Terrified," she said, leaning her head against his shoulder. The starlight caught the new, warm glint in her silver eyes, and excited, and hopeful. "It seems I am now capable of experiencing multiple inefficient states simultaneously." Leo laughed. The sound a warm vibration she felt through his body and into hers. She placed her hand over his heart, a gesture that had become their silent language. "You asked me once if love was real," she whispered, looking out at the infinite stars, each one a possible future. Leo turned her to face him, his eyes holding the same deep, sure light she had seen in his studio on the day they met. "Right here, right now," he said, his voice soft as starlight. "What's your answer?" Her answer was a kiss, deep and full of a love that had defied logic, crossed stars, and awakened an entire civilization to the symphony of its own heart. And in the quiet space between them, in the rhythm of two hearts learning to beat as one, the universe felt, for the first time, like home.